of one of the California raisins. And I don't know if any of you remember the California raisins, but they were the first Claymation creations. And they started out, it was 1986, I think. And they were just a bit part in a little commercial about raisins as health food. And but it was so fascinating for me to see how this thing worked. How could they make clay and make it come alive? And so these little raisins were marching along singing, I heard it through the grapevine, California raisins growing in the sunshine. And that's it. It was about 15 seconds. But it was a craze. It caught on. And then later in the next year, in a couple of years, they started to have their own specials. The California raisins had their Christmas special. And they sang Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer and We Three Kings of Orient Are. And I was fascinated. Because when I was a kid, we used to draw pictures on paper. And we draw a lot of pictures and then flip them real fast and say, hey, it looks like a movie. Because it looks like moving pictures. And that's exactly what they do with claymation. Take clay, mold it, put it in place, take a couple pictures, mold it again, put it in place, take a couple pictures, and then string them all together. Now, in my opinion, claymation reached its pinnacle with Wallace and Gromit. I don't know if you've seen Wallace and Gromit, but I love Wallace and Gromit. And they are so good. And it's the same thing. Pieces of clay formed, take a few pictures, then form it again. It's a painstaking process. It's so long. It takes so many hours to do it. It must cost a fortune. And I thought about that when I read this text from Jeremiah. Because here's the potter working with clay. And I love clay. And, you know, we have Play-Doh downstairs. And I play with that sometimes. And you make stuff. And the beautiful thing about clay is until you're happy with it, you can keep working it. You can turn it, you can make it into a bowl. You know, this communion chalice is very roughly made, but made just the way the artist wanted it to be. And so we see that the clay that Jeremiah is talking about, and God is giving him the message, is a representation of us. And one of the things I love about the prophets, and it's why I always tell people, read the Old Testament. There's a lot of good stuff in there. Sometimes people get afraid to read the Old Testament and say, well, it's so angry and it's so old-fashioned, but it really isn't. There's so much good information in there, so many good lessons, and today's lesson is a great example of that. Because God's saying to Jeremiah and to all of the people in the nation, you guys are like clay. And sometimes you mess up. And when the clay turns out to be not the way the potter wants it, that's sin. That's saying we've messed up, we've gone in the wrong direction, we've turned out to be the wrong shape. But the good news is, God doesn't throw away the clay. Even though we fall short, even though we may sin, God says, let's try again. Let's try again. And so the potter can say, I'm going to make this pot again. I'm going to ball it back up into a lump of clay and turn it again into something else. And try again until we get it right. Until we get the pot just the way the potter wants it. And so all of us, day after day, are being shaped by God until God gets us the way God wants us to be.